Hi, everybody. My name is Natalie Yeadon. I'm the CEO and co-founder with Impetus Digital. At Impetus Digital, we have built some of the best-in-class asynchronous and synchronous virtual collaboration and communication tools. Over the past 13 years, we have worked with life science companies from across the globe, helping them with everything from developing virtual advisory boards, online investigator meetings, virtual medical education. And since the launch of our award-winning Insight Events platform, we've been also helping pharma companies with large corporate events, MSLs and sales training, large innovation hackathons, and everything in between. But more importantly at Impetus, we really believe that everything starts with a conversation. And from these big, hairy, audacious conversations with some of the leading edge thinkers, digital provocateurs, and healthcare thought leaders, we can all work together to collectively and positively disrupt healthcare. So I'm super excited about having one of these innovative digital entrepreneurs. This is Joshua Yang. Josh is actually the co-founder and CEO of a company called Glyphic Biotechnologies. This is a biotechnology startup that's commercializing a next generation protein sequencing platform with applications in biomedical research as well as in clinical medicine. He is also the co-founder of a company called NephroSant. It's a diagnostics startup that raised over $22 million in funding to commercialize a low-cost, non-invasive test for kidney injury. Josh graduated from the University of California in San Diego with a bioengineering double major in biotechnology and general biology. Subsequently, he completed a Master of Translational Medicine degree through the University of California, San Francisco, and the University of California, Berkeley in the Department of Bioengineering. He matriculated into the MD PhD program at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine and Department of Biomedical Engineering. He subsequently graduated with an MBA. So if that wasn't enough, he graduated with an MBA from the Stanford University Graduate School of Business. And in 2021, Josh was named to the Forbes 30 Under 30 healthcare list. Welcome, Josh. So happy to have you on the show.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm very happy to be here.
Absolutely. So what a wonderful, colorful background, super inspiring for probably many people listening to this. So I was wondering if you could just in a quick nutshell, give us an illustration of the decisions that you've made, the people that you've met, and how you landed where you are today.
Yeah, I would love to be able to say that it was a very intentional decision, one where I was like, I need each of these degrees in order to achieve the visions that I have for my career. But the reality is it was very much a random walk in some sense, trying to figure out what I wanted to do in life, still trying to figure out what I want to do, but always making the decision that I thought was what I was doing was I was most passionate about at that given time. And so I decided to go do an MD PhD program because while I was an undergrad, I had this vision of being this academic professor who would discover new technologies in the laboratory, but then also be able to treat patients with the same technologies that I was going to develop and really have this clinical, medical, scientific training. But then what I realized after going into medical school was that a lot of the technologies that impact the world and actually have an impact on treating patients need to actually leave the laboratory and make it to the commercial setting to be commercialized and then eventually reach the market. And so that inspired me to go pursue business instead, because I knew that the technologies that I wanted to bring to patients were ones that I would myself need to bring to the market and commercialize. And so that's how I ended up testing all these different pathways and sort of how I landed here where I am today.
It's really wonderful to see that. Now we're living in a new world. A lot of people are we're calling it the Great Resignation, or some people are calling it the Great Reset, or reflection, if you will. And so a lot of people are in the academia space thinking about entrepreneurship. Tell us a little bit about some of the lessons learned and what it took for you to make that transition from technical academia into this world of entrepreneurship. It truly is very different. So what has worked for you?
Yeah, It was a very difficult decision, even though I knew that to commercialize the technologies, to make them available to patients was necessary. It was a very difficult decision to leave what had been sort of this, very well-defined track to, go to medical school, then become a professor, one day open my own laboratory, right? This very technical academic route was well-defined, and going off the path to do entrepreneurship, initially was a very scary decision. But when I was thinking about it and thinking about the ambitions and goals that I wanted to achieve in my own life and what would be necessary to achieve that level of goals, I realized that taking this well-defined path was actually a bigger risk to me not achieving my goals than to actually jump into entrepreneurship and go headfirst, believing in myself and believing that by following this path of entrepreneurship, I would achieve the goals that I'd set for myself. And so I would say, in this great reset that you mentioned, right, this is an opportune time. I think people, myself included, realizing just how valuable our time is and just how quickly, what we take for granted can change. And this is truly a great time to take stock of what goals you have for yourself and whether the path that you're on is a path that will lead you to those goals. And if not, taking that next step to change course and follow your dreams.
And, as you're talking, I'm also curious because you also do a lot of investing and you're sort of involved in that space. What are some of the things that you have noticed is sort of a common norm, if you will, with innovators and entrepreneurs? And have you noticed any change in stance and attitude and people's ability to quickly pivot since COVID-19?
Yeah, I mean, having been on both sides, I guess on the side of the entrepreneur, as well as on the side of understanding how investors make their decisions to choose which entrepreneurs and which businesses to invest in. I have been being able to see both sides of the table has helped me personally be an entrepreneur. And when I think about the ability to quickly shift and alter your career path, I think that now when I see my friends going to pitch companies, there are so many more people that are pursuing this path. And so if I think back to my graduating class at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, I would say almost half of my class was interested in entrepreneurship, and so many, at least 100 are pursuing entrepreneurship post-graduation now, which is, I think, unheard of for business, where traditionally many students would go into finance or into consulting or other traditional business careers. And so I think, the times have changed where people are very willing to take that risk on themselves working together as a community to learn how to do entrepreneurship and make success in the space.
Yeah, beautiful. You, one of the first companies that you have co-founded was called NephroSant. So first of all, the name, how did somebody come up with that? What was also your inspiration and motivation for co-founding that company?
Yeah, I just think the name was changed actually halfway through. Originally, when it was first started, 5 years ago, we were called KIT Bio, KIT Bio, which was an acronym which stood for Kidney Injury Test. But also KIT because it was a diagnostic test that was planned to be point of care. So you could have it as a kit to be used, inexpensively for patients in need. But KIT Bio sounded very much like a traditional tech Silicon Valley tech name, and a lot of the biotech investors thought the name was a little bit silly, and so we changed it to a more traditional biotech name, I suppose, where nephro, of course, means kidney, and sant is health. And so the name is still related to kidney health, but slightly changed. And to answer your question about, what motivated me to start this, throughout all of undergrad, I had worked very hard to learn bioengineering, biotechnology principles, and how to develop technologies in the space. But I didn't really have an area where to apply these skills to yet in the real world. And so after undergrad, I did a master's program at UCSF, where I met a clinical professor, Minnie Sarwal, who she had patients who had kidney transplants. And these patients, though, suffered from episodes of acute rejection. That is your body rejecting the kidney. And this was because today, ways to diagnose organ rejection are very limited. Right now, either you get a blood draw, but blood draws are very insensitive to detecting this type of rejection at an early stage. By the time you detect it with a blood draw, a lot of damage has already occurred to your kidney. The other way is to do a kidney biopsy, which essentially you stick a needle into your kidney. Not very pleasant, I can tell you, and no one really wants to do it. And so there's this huge unmet need, especially for pediatric patients, for developing a non-invasive test that could accurately and very early on predict kidney transplant rejection. And so my background in assay and technology development in the biotech space, along with Minnie's clinical experience and firsthand experience with these patients, together, I think we made the perfect team to launch this company.
So what exactly is the test and how does it work and who's administering it?
Yeah, so the test is a urine-based test, so fully non-invasive, not even a blood draw required. And what you do is a patient who is being monitored, or maybe you suspect has a transplant rejection of the kidney, pees into a urine cup, and then we process the urine in our laboratory, where we look for very specific biomarkers in the urine that can, together, using a digital machine learning algorithm, predict whether or not the patient is at high risk or is actively undergoing a kidney rejection. And so once the patient pees into the cup, the urine arrives in our laboratory, we process the sample very quickly for a quick turnaround time, and then we're able to provide the results back through an electronic medical record to both the physician and to the patient, so that they can either be at ease knowing that their kidney is safe, or they can get early treatment to prevent any further damage from occurring.
Amazing. Now, you actually talk about a centralized lab. In terms of scaling, was there anything that NephroSant did in terms of collaborating with other centers of excellence? So this is something that could be studied at the local hospital so they could get their results even faster. What was the plan of action around collaborations?
Yeah, so our test we are offering through a CLIA laboratory, so a central laboratory. And our idea is that we will eventually be able to offer this so that other central laboratories will be able to run the test and provide even quicker turnaround time, even greater patient accessibility for this test. I think operating it out of our own CLIA laboratory right now already affords a great level of patient access, because you don't need to have expensive instrumentation or very skilled staff at the sites where patients may be, because all you need to do is essentially pee into a cup and send it to us, right, in the mail. And so, we are excited for the possibility for our test to be expanded even more nationwide, for others to operate. But we are very happy right now with the model that we're running, enabling a lot of patient access to the test.
So in terms of the business model, how is it presented to the patient or the end user or the prescribing clinician? Is it a cash payer that's paying for this, giving them the option of, well, you can find out if you're going to be more susceptible to this, and you can pay for it. Like, who's actually paying for this test?
Yeah, in the realm of kidney diseases are one of a few exceptions in Medicare, where even if you're not over 65 years old, Medicare will cover the cost of chronic end-stage renal disease. And so, of which, once you receive a transplant, that transplant is typically to treat end-stage renal disease. And so Medicare will actually cover the cost of the tests, and reimburse companies upwards of $2,300 per test. And so the out-of-pocket cost to the patients is actually almost nothing, because this reimbursement is able to cover the cost of the test, especially for a test like ours, which is non-invasive and fairly cheap to operate. And so that's another factor behind why our patient accessibility to our test was important to us from the very beginning, and we designed it in such a way that it would continue to be accessible, especially for patients nationwide who can access the test with Medicare reimbursement.
So how did you start marketing this to clinicians and others? What was your sales and marketing strategy?
Yeah, my co-founder, Minnie Sarwal, is a key opinion leader in this space. She's a well-recognized expert in nephrology, in the transplant sector. And so she was able to speak with her colleagues, right, who run transplant centers nationwide, who are in, she herself at the University of California, San Francisco system, was able to speak with the University of California transplant physicians within the whole UC network. And through this sort of word of mouth from a trusted source, right, someone who not only is developing the technology, but is someone who has had firsthand experience with patients and knows how to address the unmet needs in this space. I think that was a very compelling story to have people through word of mouth adopt the test.
Absolutely. Now, you found a really interesting niche in the fact that Medicare would be paying for this test. So I'm assuming that you did not have to go through the regular route that a lot of diagnostics have to go through, which is, working with payers and all kinds of other people. So was this an easier route with the fact that you found this kind of micro niche of payment, if you will, and that it was just an easier route to getting payments?
Yeah, with this sort of test, Medicare still wanted to see clinical proof of efficacy, right? And so we had 2 studies showing clinical efficacy. One was published in Science Translational Medicine. We also had a study showing analytical validity, meaning that our test functioned as expected, right? Was reproducible, had low error variability. And so we still had to prove that the test worked, even if we didn't need to cater to, I guess, the stringent requirements that maybe these private payers may have. Right now we have CMS reimbursement, but we also, now will be pursuing the small percent of patients that do have private insurance for this indication. But of course, having that Medicare reimbursement upfront already makes it much easier to convince private payers.
So you were mentioning earlier, Josh, that there's some algorithm, there's sort of machine learning, if you will, and the test gets smarter over time. How has the algorithm changed since you've been starting to add patients into the mix? And are you assessing the accuracy of this versus some other standard measure of how people are discerning if somebody is more or less susceptible to a kidney transplant in a negative way? So how are things evolving for the test?
Yeah, I think when we initially designed the test, we already had hundreds of biobanked patient samples that we, retrospectively collected, but prospectively analyzed, meaning that we did not know what the results were going to be until after we had, performed our test on these samples. And I think with such a large patient sample size, we were able to have very robust results with the algorithm that we initially developed. And of course, we are continuing to evaluate ways to see whether improvements could be made, whether we can add additional biomarkers to the test to add additional pieces of information that could be clinically relevant. Many patients with transplants suffer from viral infections because the patients are typically immunosuppressed so that your body doesn't reject the kidney, but that same treatment makes you more likely to have infections. And so we have looked into adding additional biomarkers that would, complementary to the existing algorithm, tell you whether or not you had an ongoing infection, and then the physician would be able to also treat that if necessary. And so I think we're always looking for ways to improve or add capabilities to the test.
So this is obviously a lucrative space. You raised $22 million from investors. What was the story that you told? What was the market opportunity here if this was really just sort of micro niching for like pediatrics or people with kidney transplants? What was the story that evolved that got people interested in? And secondly, or an addendum to that question is, what about other competitors coming in with other algorithms that are smarter, better, faster? What's keeping you ahead of the curve?
Yeah, excellent question. In terms of diagnostics generally is a very difficult space to, make investors excited in, because diagnostics typically are not the kind of investments that are going to make you your unicorn returns necessarily. And so to tell the story in a way that really got investors, interested, part of it was, of course, the almost guaranteed reimbursement by Medicare, right, at over as I mentioned, 2,300 per test. That was a key part in letting investors know that the test, we're going to develop it. The test, we know it works, but more than just working, we know that payers will reimburse us for this so that patients can benefit. So I think that was the most key thing that we were able to demonstrate. And then I think the belief that our test would be the one, to answer your second question, the belief that our test would be the one to, capture the market given its features. Many people had developed other next generation rejection tests based on, looking at the biopsy. So before, people would do biopsy and look at it under the microscope. Some people have developed tests that look at the biopsy with molecular means, like sequencing, for example. But those kind of tests still require you to go get a kidney biopsy, which no one really wants to do. And then there were other groups who developed tests based on blood draws, which also are somewhat less convenient than just peeing into a cup again. But also, in many ways, we predicted and we explained to the investors that we believe that blood-based tests would be less accurate. And you can imagine that if you pee into a cup, everything that is in your urine actually comes straight from the kidney, right? It is truly a window into the health of the kidney because it is purified, filtered by the kidney. But if you do a blood draw, the blood goes throughout your entire body. And so you might have had an injury because you were playing sports the other day. You could have had like a minor infection in like your foot or something. All of so many different random factors that could impact your ability to accurately predict, the health of the kidney from the blood. And so I think the fact that we were urine-based was also a big factor in why people believe that we would be the ones to, be most successful in this market.
Beautiful. I'm going to transition into your current company that you've co-founded, Glyphic Biotechnologies. Tell us a little bit, Josh, why you founded this company and how you transitioned from NephroSant.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I was the technical person on the team inventing the underlying technologies that, comprise the assay today. But seeing the company NephroSant, evolve over time from the very beginning, where we were still developing the assay, there was still technical risk about would the test work in the clinical setting, all of these different technical risks, to where it is today, where it's all about execution, right, and commercial launch. Seeing that transition in the company from that technical to the business side made me realize that I wanted that same transition in my own life. And I no longer just wanted to be purely on the technical side, but I wanted to be someone who could lead the business operations and actually have the vision for the company and lead that vision. And so that's why I went to the Stanford Graduate School of Business, so I could formally learn business skills, build a network of individuals, fellow entrepreneurs, like-minded individuals, and be able to then launch a search from that for what could be my next biotech startup and find a next co-founder who I could launch that with. And so I actually was able to do that in my last year of business school, where during the COVID-19 pandemic, I attended a online co-founder speed dating event and I was paired up with who would be my co-founder today. And we hit it off from the very beginning. That was back in December of 2020, not too long ago, less than a year ago. In January, we were like, let's work together officially. We incorporated the company in March, and only a couple months later had already closed our seed round of funding. So, things just accelerated really fast. And I feel very fortunate that during this, because of the sort of random online events during COVID, this company, was formed.
So Glyphic Biotechnologies, what exactly is it? And the name Glyphic, what does it mean?
Yeah, so Glyphic Biotechnologies, what we are doing is creating a next generation protein sequencing machine. Essentially, we're able to do digital quantification of proteins in your samples and able to provide you the amino acid sequence of the proteins. You can imagine that right now, DNA sequencing is very well known and very popular, where sequencing the DNA gives you each of the 4 nucleotides or letters in the DNA sequence. we're doing the same thing, but instead of for nucleotides, we're providing you the 20 different amino acids or the 20 different letters of the protein alphabet. And so the reason that we're called Glyphic is because it's kind of like hieroglyphic, where hieroglyphs are characters that resemble like the Egyptian alphabet. And instead, we are glyphs in a different sense, where each letter of the protein amino acid alphabet is what we are looking for.
We heard some things recently about some releases from Google in this realm. So how much impact did Google's release impact your thinking, your company, and what it is that you're doing around protein sequencing?
Yeah, Google recently released a very exciting technology called AlphaFold, which uses a protein sequence and is able to predict the structure of that with a high degree of accuracy, the highest that has ever been known compared to previous attempts to predict structure. And we think that's super exciting because the ability to like take the sequence and then get the structure from it, I think is very complementary to what we're doing, where we are able to take a sample, an unknown protein sample, and able to tell you the sequence from it. And so the fact that Google's AlphaFold was released and to so much essentially fanfare and news, really has brought the proteomics, protein structure and sequencing to sort of more like people's awareness. And so this, I think it's been very helpful for us in terms of people being aware of the importance of what we're doing.
So Josh, this is kind of interesting because, we hear a lot around, like you said, genomic testing, all of the impact that's going to have on disease detection early on and cancer sequencing and all sorts of things. But with that, it does come to mind about this idea of stem cell development and, creation of human cells. Tell us about why protein sequencing is different than that. Why do we want to do protein sequencing instead of just expanding on genomic sequencing and the whole genome, if we can create human cells and tissues and organs that way?
Yeah, no, that is, an excellent question. And right now, genomics, DNA, right? It's so widespread, well known that even the public, right, the common public is aware of it. Like people know about 23andMe, right, and the ability to get your DNA analyzed to figure out your health risks, your traits. But that's exactly what I think what DNA is in some ways limited to is, right? Your DNA is essentially the same throughout your entire life, right? The sequence doesn't really change. And so like if you do 23andMe once, you only have to do it once. You never need to do it again because your sequence remains the same. And so it sort of provides a static indicator in your life of, you have this set of DNA and it can tell you that you are at risk for this, or you are likely to have this feature or this trait. But it can never actually tell you you are going to get this disease, or you looks like you have this disease, or even, oh, this medication looks like it's making your disease better. Right? Those are things that the DNA won't tell you because it doesn't change. But proteins and the ability to understand the proteins better by sequencing them, proteins are dynamic. The proteins are constantly changing in your body, which proteins are present, how many of each protein there is, right? If those proteins are modified in any way, which impacts the function that they have in your body. These are all things that protein sequencing would be able to tell you. And so you could really have a dynamic indicator of your health by looking at the proteins. And so I don't think it's certainly not going to replace genomics or DNA analysis. I think those applications you mentioned, are very important applications. I really do think of these as complementary technologies where advancing both will advance human health on two separate fronts.
So tell us a little bit more concretely. I don't know, I'm a pharma company. We're always looking for ways of innovating and sort of getting beyond the pill. Like, the idea of chemical entities is sort of, it's expanding now. People are getting into other sorts of things like software as a medical device and many other things. But now we're hearing about this protein sequencing, this sort of next generation. And what does that mean for company X? How are we going to push the envelope in disrupting healthcare and changing the way we do things? What does this look like concretely?
Yeah, I think to give a first example, one of the ways that protein sequencing and next generation proteomics will be able to help biopharma companies treat patients better is through personalized patient stratification. And so the ability to identify patient populations that are going to respond with better efficacy to the drugs that a company is developing. And so because we are able to analyze the entire proteome of a sample, we can identify all the different biomarkers that could predict whether or not a biopharma company's drug is going to work in this patient or not. And then this could either be used to stratify patients in clinical trials to improve the likelihood of success of approval and thus getting more drugs into the hands of needing patients, or it could be used afterwards as sort of a monitoring tool so that after you give a patient a medication, you could use the biomarkers that we've discovered with our system to then monitor to see whether the patient is responding to the treatment after you've given it to them. And if they are responding, or if they're not responding, then you can switch the medication. And so I really do see opportunities for biopharma companies to, have greater precision in personalized medicine and targeting the right patients at the right time. So that's one example.
Yeah. So Josh, what is the company's buying from you? Is it buying the biomarker tests? Is it a diagnostic? Is it the service of you helping them to filter what's happening in their clinical studies? What is the product or the service?
Yes, the main product and service that we will be offering will be an actual instrument, the sequencer itself, that biopharma companies, researchers, core laboratories, these facilities can all buy the instrument and then also purchase consumables that will be needed to run the instrument. And then they can choose how to use the instrument themselves for whichever research purposes or clinical purposes that they envision. And, we've spoken with many different biopharma companies, and I'm just always inspired by how many different possibilities that these companies have for the use of a protein sequencing technology. And so I know that by offering the instrument for other people to use, I think there'll be such an explosion of different possible use cases to advance the biomedical sciences and clinical medicine. I think, but additionally, we would also plan to offer some form of services to biopharma companies where, we of course have the greatest level of expertise with how we will be using the device. And we'd love to partner with biopharma companies to work with them to use our system to develop effective diagnostics or effective therapies for their specific needs.
It's a very interesting world as we think about and extrapolate in the world of tech. And we know that algorithms and just technology and software and hardware and everything, it becomes obsolete very quickly. How is that different in the biotech space? So if you actually marry your services with your specific technology, does that create an issue short-term or mid-term in terms of becoming obsolete? So what is the challenge of having both the hardware and the service piece to what biotechnology companies need?
Yeah, I would say that, by being the platform, whether the hardware or the service in either case, is actually the best position to be in because, you can always update the hardware, update the underlying internals of the service that you're providing, right? And keep making it better and better able to fit the needs of, in this case, biopharma customers, right? But if we were just to develop a single diagnostic test or a single therapy, right? Eventually, these therapies may become outdated, or these diagnostics may not be as good as newer ones, right? And so that's where technological obsolescence may occur, is when you are only having a single asset or a couple assets based on the technology. So for us, by being the platform and being able to continually create new applications for the technology, discover new therapies, new diagnostic tests, I don't think that we will face this problem. I think we will be able to keep riding this, this trend of proteomics, the same way that genomics, right, has expanded continuously. There's no end in sight to what genomics can do. And I think the same will be true for the proteomic space.
So just launching into the other roles that you also endeavor in as a venture capital fellow and an investor. Tell us a little bit about now having the real life experience, being an entrepreneur, pivoting, raising rounds, all these sorts of things, like growing a company and operationalizing it. What are the things that you look for in companies and the people that are working and functioning in these new startups?
Yeah, I see when I look at companies, right, and based on my own personal experience, understanding that the team, right, is amongst the most important thing. And, in my own personal experiences, what I I mentioned my story about how Glyphic Biotechnologies came to be, right? But that was not just the first company that, I tried to endeavor to start. There were many different mishaps along the way in terms of trying to launch something and not working for various reasons. But one of the key reasons why things wouldn't work is because of team dynamics rather than necessarily the technology. And in the sciences, in the deep tech life sciences space, it's almost crazy to say, but I think good ideas and good technical ideas are easier to come by than a good team. And so when I look at companies, I think the team is the most important thing, because it's a marriage in some sense, in that, especially in the life sciences, where you have to work on the technology for a long time in order to make it work, in order for it to reach patients and reach the clinic. Your team needs to be cohesive from the very beginning. Otherwise, things are not going to stick together for very long. And so that is something that I've learned, both, working as a fellow, learning from more seasoned venture capitalists, learning from my own personal experiences. So that's what I would say is the most important factor. Of course, the technology is very important, making sure there is truly an unmet need, making sure that there's been enough customer discovery in place so that we know that the technology could be cool, but it may not be a technology that should be commercialized, right? So they're looking into those factors as well in the holistic evaluation of the company.
And so I guess as a final note, Josh, what's next for you? What's your hopes and plans for the future?
Yeah, as I said, just my path has been sort of this random walk. It's when people ask me, like, what do you want to do in 5 years from now? I'm like, I really don't even know what I could be doing in 2 years from now. I think that's slightly different now. Now, I do truly think that this company, and doing this company with my co-founder, Daniel, I think together we really have this great vision for the company to, not just be a leader in proteomics and by, commercializing this next generation protein sequencing platform, but really to transform the life sciences and how research is conducted by making available our technologies, by commercializing therapeutics and diagnostics ourselves from our technology, and then eventually, hopefully, enabling other young entrepreneurs, young biologists, scientists to come and join us to help create, technologies that we haven't even conceived of ourselves, right? That we want to support, because we know that we are not the only ones with good ideas. There are so many people with great ideas who, are waiting to be discovered, and we want to help discover them and make their dreams also a reality.
I absolutely love it. Thank you for leaving this on an inspiring note. For anybody who might be listening or watching this show and you're interested in connecting with Josh, partnerships, opportunities to work with Glyphic Biotechnologies, or basically you've got a really great idea and you want to actually chat with Josh, please check out the show notes. We have actually left his contact details there. If you enjoyed this discussion, I also encourage you to check out impetusdigital.com. These are the kinds of conversations we have all the time. Payers, physicians, allied healthcare providers, patients. We work together through a series of asynchronous and synchronous touch points throughout the year on a variety of topics, using all of our online tools so that we can move these interesting technologies, ideas, concepts, strategies, moving this available forward without everybody having to get together in meetings at expensive time. We can all do this virtually, and Impetus does this with our white glove service. So check that out. We'd really appreciate if you can like and subscribe to our channel, and please leave us some feedback on iTunes. We'd really appreciate it. Josh, thank you so much for a great conversation, and we wish everybody a wonderful day ahead.